Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Jim Waring. Joining me on today's show is Phoenix Parks and Recreation Director, Cynthia Aguilar. Cynthia, welcome to the show.
Hi, Councilman. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So you've got a big responsibility. People like their parks here in Phoenix. We have a very extensive system, so we'll get right to that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how did you become Parks Director?
Sure. Well, I am from Phoenix, so I've lived here mostly all my life, and I started working for the Parks Department when I was in college, working with our after-school programs, and I got lucky. There were job opportunities when I graduated, and I knew I wanted to work with children, and it was perfect. I started my career as a recreation coordinator in the Parks Department. I've just been really fortunate to have opportunities in different departments throughout the city that have helped me gain the experience I needed to become the Parks Director.
That's just fantastic. It's always great to see somebody who's doing something that they thought would be a good idea when they were a kid, and here it is. You might be the one. But how big is the Parks Department? Like, what is your budget? How many staffers do we have in the Parks Department?
Well, first, we have the largest municipally managed park system in the country. So we are the largest park system in that way. We have close to 1,400 employees who work for us, and we have a budget of about $115 million. Plus, we manage millions of dollars in the Phoenix Parks and Preserves Initiative Fund, the 3PI Fund, which is a sales tax initiative.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you have a big responsibility, that's clear. But how many parks do we have? Like, how do you define a park?
Well, we have 186 developed parks, and those range in size, and so we define them by park acreage and the types of amenities they have. So we have regional parks, which have things like lakes for fishing and sports complex facilities, skate plazas and those, and we have community and neighborhood parks, are a little bit smaller, might be more intended for those who live immediately around those parks, and then even smaller neighborhood and mini parks.
Now, how do you decide, so if you live by a park and you like tennis, and your park doesn't have tennis, but the park down the street does, how are those things decided?
Sure, great question. And so one, if any member from the public has an interest in seeing something in their park that doesn't exist now, they can certainly contact the Parks Department and submit that request, and we will review it and we'll look at what the nearest amenities are that they're looking for. We look at service radius areas, if you will, and we have some standards that help us decide how many amenities we should have within that mile radius. So again, if it's a tennis court that we don't have, we'll look to see if we have one within a reasonable distance within a few miles, and if we don't, we'll put that on a future list as a potential future capital improvement project.
Now, people see, because we do hear this, we have a relatively newer, probably isn't the correct word, but a less developed bigger footprint in District 2. So, new houses are built and parks go in and the city set aside land and people see the signs. How long does it take to build a park, start to finish?
Oh, great question. If it's your average 10 to 15 acre neighborhood to community type of park, we're looking at a minimum of 18 months. And that's really to include the community engagement process, the designing and permits, and then the actual construction.
So we're going through this process right now up in the northern part of the district, and people had concerns about the placement of some of the amenities and the parking and the traffic flow and so forth, but you already alluded to it, but maybe we could flesh this out a little bit. The neighbors have a lot of input on that and have really throughout the process. They sort of get a chance to talk about what they'd like to see in the park and how it's set up. So can you talk about that a little bit and how your professional staff incorporates their needs within the constraints of a budget, because you don't have unlimited money for all the things that people want?
Yes, definitely. So District 2 is beautiful, obviously. We have about 26 parks in District 2, and we have a handful of undeveloped parks. And so the one in particular that you're referring to is Lone Mountain on 36th Street in Montgomery, and it's an undeveloped park site, and we just conducted a community engagement process. So we mailed out more than 10,000 postcards to Phoenix residents who live within a 3-mile radius of that park. We also had a very large banner out there with a QR code right in a location by the school next to the future park where cars line up to drop off and pick up their children, so people could scan that QR code and give us their feedback. And so we had over 900 responses to this survey, which is good for this type of process, I would say. It's a 40-acre site approximately, and we have funding now through impact fees and through funds that are budgeted to maintain the park to be able to build this park. And so this being a larger park at 40 acres, it's probably going to be closer to a 24-month process before the park is planned, permitted, and constructed.
Now, the immediate neighbors, they may have concerns about, traffic or noise or lighting. Usually that kind of comes with the territory of building a park. How do you factor that in?
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, I'm glad you brought me back to that. We have heard concerns in that area from lighting. People have lived there for many years and they've become accustomed to what they are right now, and it's a darker type of area, but the Parks Department complies with the dark sky lighting requirements, and so any lighting that we put in that park is going to be compliant with that so that they're not intrusive to any of the immediate homes around the area. Traffic is always a concern. Noise from pickleball courts has been a concern, and so through this process we presented the community with an initial design that the steering committee came up with, which are members of the immediate community. And based on the feedback that we're receiving, we'll be making adjustments. And so I'm already seeing the designer move the pickleball courts further into the interior of the park, also looking to get them information on how the dark sky compliant lighting works to help them feel like we're hearing them and incorporating their feedback.
And with 900 plus responses, you had a lot of folks who were certainly interested in this park. I assume you probably didn't get too many saying, by golly, I don't want to park in my neighborhood. I don't think that's usually the way it works. So it's probably people asking for specific items, and then the placement of those items, and then the traffic and the lighting. Is that a fair summary of what those 900 folks probably look like if I looked at all their survey responses?
Exactly, Councilman. That's exactly what it is. I think we had approximately 80% who were already pleased with the design as it was presented, but they might have still given feedback on real specific things that maybe were in the park, but they'd like to see in a different location in the park. Some people said, do we need this much parking? And so it was kind of all over the board, but to get about 80% that are generally pleased and then just have to tweak the plan from there was really good feedback. And I think there's a lot of people around there who are excited to have amenities near them.
And you've had, certainly in my experience working with you, we've had parks that are going to be added to or sort of redone. Same process, basically. Hey, what would you like to see at this park? And maybe people like to see bathrooms or whatever. They're given a budget, and then the committee sort of fleshes it out. Is that a fair summary of the process?
Exactly, and that's exactly what we do. We let them know the budget, the funding that is budgeted for that particular year. We give them ideas of what things cost, so they know what can fit within that budget. So they know a restroom facility is generally $500,000. So if we come to a community and say, we have $1.5 million in improvements for you, they're going to spend a big chunk if they want restrooms or restroom renovations, depending on how large of a renovation that is. And so it helps them put it in perspective. Is that important to us, or do we want more athletic courts? Do we want a dog park, a skate plaza? And so we have processes where we can work through that feedback with them.
Now, really pre-COVID, we got a lot of requests for soccer fields. That was one of the things that I remember well. Teams just didn't, particularly if you got further north up towards Carefree Highway, you had a lot of folks saying, there aren't enough places for us to practice, and we'll get to reach 11 in a second, but is there a way to open up fields or build new fields? If I recall, and this is a few years dated information, I'm sure it's way more expensive now, a soccer field was $1 million or more, but then the thing people forget, we might be able to do the $1 million, it's the maintenance of the field, and you can't use it all the time because you'll wreck the field. So you want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you specifically face. It's not like building a road and then everybody drives on it to their heart's content until we have to fix it. You have a lot more maintenance and care on a really ongoing basis.
Yes, and that $1 million, you're right, that was the right number at the time. We're seeing at least a 20 to 30% inflation on everything that we're building right now. So I would add that to any current number now based on previous estimates. But you're right, the fields are in such demand and they get such heavy use. Turf just can't sustain that kind of use without taking the time off to let it rest and recover. And sometimes that's frustrating to the public because they might see a field that's closed or fenced off for a certain period of time. We like to do that over the summer during the warmer months when maybe there's less activity out there to try to restore that turf, and so that's something we're constantly doing. We do it in dog parks as well, and so that's why our new dog park standard is to have 3 pens, one for the large dogs, the smaller dogs, and then that extra pen so that we're constantly rotating through them. In an example like that, we wouldn't have to come in and close a dog park for 6 to 8 weeks like we do currently, which we also do in the summer months.
And dog parks got to be a bigger thing. We put in at least a couple in District 2 here while we've been working together. It's always better if the plumbing and everything is already there. I learned that the dog park is really pricey. It just looks like grass, but you got to have appropriate drainage and engineering and so forth. So it's not quite as easy as it seems. But you know, one of the things that we try to think of course, is these are amenities that people really want to use. It's to enhance life, so your lifestyle. So we don't want to put in lighting that people don't want. We don't want to put in noise-making things that people don't want. We don't want to disrupt the traffic flow. But at the same time, respecting that people are going to come from sometimes miles away to use the parks. We don't have a park on every single street corner, irrespective of the fact that we got more than the average bear when it comes to big cities. Is there anything that makes you think, oh, there's a better way we could do this? Because we have had our challenges, and I'm just curious, your years of experience, you know, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think generally, Councilman, that, well, first off, the Parks Department is preparing to launch our system-wide Parks Master Plan. We have not done one since 1988, and so that's a long time. The city has changed quite a bit, communities have changed quite a bit.
The taste change in sports and activities and so forth. So.
Absolutely.
Dog parks weren't as big a thing back then. Now it's a thing. People want dog parks.
It's a very big thing. I was looking at a study recently, and it said, you know, that there was a large percentage, like 75% of people would move somewhere where there were more amenities for them and their pets, which is really interesting, you know, and they want more dog-friendly parks, even if it's not a dog park, maybe a dog run or an off-leash designated area. And so we're seeing trends for cricket, right? And especially in our north part of the valley, and people are asking for cricket infrastructure in our parks now. We hadn't really had those requests over the recent years. And so the master plan process will help us engage with communities throughout the entire city and identify some of those things. Do we have amenities that are underutilized? Do we have parks that don't have the right amenities anymore for the community that's around them now? And so those kinds of things on how we can do better and identify trends and things that are going on that we may not know about will come through this master plan process.
Because you do try to the extent that you can. You can't have somebody watching every piece of equipment or every field all the time, but you do try to monitor usage from spot checking and so forth. So, you know, we're trying to use the money as best we can. We don't have an unlimited budget, but when you look at our trail systems and everything, it really stacks up with any city, probably even around the world. I mean, is that a fair statement?
I think it's a very fair statement. We're so lucky here to have the vast mountain parks and preserve system that we have here, which also factors into making us one of the largest, you know, park systems around the country and the world because of that, just in itself in terms of acreage. But we also have a lot of amenities. We have over 200 miles of trails in the trails that you were just mentioning. Reach 11 has many of those, you know, in District 2, and we're so proud to have that within the park system because you can go to the Reach 11 area and you can enjoy trails, you can enjoy Horse Lovers Park for those folks with horses, and if you have a kid playing soccer, you're going to love the fields over at Reach 11 for competitive soccer. So we're very proud of all of those amenities.
When you use the word competitive, could you explain a little bit about what Reach 11 is for and why it's there and why it's a little different than your average neighborhood park?
It is, absolutely. It's a massive sports complex specifically for soccer, and we take very good care of that. You know, it's a first-rate facility. Teams from all over the country, especially in the Southwest, come to play soccer, youth soccer in particular, in that facility. We also have a baseball field there, believe that or not, and so we also have some other types of amenities. We have a playground there, but for the families that come in, they're in a part of town where they can go eat, they can stay in hotels, they can come for that tournament that may be in town for the weekend, and we take really good care of those fields, so we don't treat them like all of the others. You can't just come, drop by, and play your own soccer match, if you will, or practice on those fields, because they're really intended to serve that unique niche for us.
Yeah, and sometimes that's not totally understood. People, like you said, get frustrated. They drive up, they see the beautiful fields, but it's really more of almost a tourist destination in a lot of ways, an economic engine, than it is a neighborhood park. That's not really its intended purpose. You may play there if you're on a team that's playing in a competition, But it's not the same as you just walk out there with your ball and start kicking it around. It's not set up for that purpose.
Exactly, and we try to make it accessible to the general public at large by having community events there, which may take place in the parking lot versus on those fields, and by having access to that playground certain times of the year as well, so that the neighborhood can walk across the street and still have some access to it despite the fields being intended for that tournament play, if you will.
Now, we also own golf courses. That's a little sensitive for me because I do tend to vote against the things that are golf related, because when I got here, we were losing money hand over fist. I think it topped out at $2.4 million. They're certainly in better shape now. Obviously, there are a lot of golf courses in the valley. I won't regurgitate my talking points about why maybe we'd have better use of city resources. We want to talk about how those courses are funded and kind of what the goal is there.
Absolutely. We have 8 city golf courses throughout our park system, and it's really intended to provide affordable golf play for our residents. And so we have opportunities for youth to play. We have golf lessons that take place for youth and adults out of the golf courses as well, on top of the traditional rounds of golf you can play at a 9 or 18 hole golf course. And so we are happy to report they are fully cost recovery and have been for a few years now. And so you're recalling—
That's a big change from
it is.
$2.4 million in losses every year that somebody has to cover. They don't get to just lose money in perpetuity. And I think that was up to maybe $15 million cumulative total, if memory serves. It's dated information. So it's very heartening for me to hear that we're back in kind of back in the saddle there. One crazy change we made was to hire people who actually run golf courses for a living to actually run the golf courses. So that seemed to help some. But it is good news for people who wonder, why do we have these golf courses? There is a goal, and it's a lot more palatable goal to me when we're breaking even.
Yes, definitely. And you're right, we did a lot of things. We've actually outsourced the maintenance of those golf courses to achieve some to achieve budget savings for the golf courses. And so that was something that we did. And so we did do some work to reorganize the structure of what those golf courses look like from a staffing perspective. That's been a big help. And through COVID, we saw a big increase in use because there were so few things that people could do indoors. They went outdoors more. And so we saw more hikers, more golfers, and those numbers have been holding steady. And I'm so glad I wasn't the parks director in the time that you referenced, however, of course.
Well, it was a lot of budget pressure. I mean, it wasn't necessarily fun for sure, but it seems to have stabilized anyway, so that's something. We also have a tennis center, which I like to play tennis. I don't get to play that often. When I do, it's usually when I'm out of town with friends, but I didn't know until they were down here for a tournament and invited me that we had a tennis center. And that was right about the time I got in the city council. So you want to talk about the tennis center? It had just been refurbished when I came on the council. It's a beautiful facility. But I think I'm guessing a lot of people don't know that it exists. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. The Phoenix Tennis Center, and it's located at Washington Park, so near 23rd Avenue in Glendale, between Glendale and Bethany Home. And we have a third-party operator, the Ragland family, and he's a former tennis pro who run this facility now for us. And it's a very high-quality facility. We're so proud to have it as part of the park system now, and it's heavily used. They're doing a lot to promote it, but I agree with you. We need to work with them more to make sure people know about it and that it exists, because I get that comment from many people as well. And once people go, they absolutely love it. And so they're doing very well. And I believe we have 18 courts, might be more now, in the facility, and we're constantly doing work to make sure that facility is a first-class tennis facility.
I haven't been there in years, but beautiful courts. Certainly they were beautiful courts, nice pro shop and everything, very professionally run. And I was like, holy cow, when did this happen? So that was, it's just something I wanted to make sure that got mentioned, because I fear that, a lot of people who might want to play don't know that that's available. Yes. On another note, I think people know about these, but like our trail system and our parks, certainly in District 2, that's a big deal. But I think some of our trails are some of the longest in the country, if not the world, correct?
Yes, especially those at South Mountain Park. So South Mountain Park for many years was the largest park in the country, and right now, I think we're now number 2. I am verifying that, but there
I appreciate you not overselling, so thank you for that.
There are many trails throughout the whole park system, but in particular at South Mountain being such a large area that we have in our preserve system where people can not just hike, they can mountain bike, they can also just drive. It's about a 30-minute drive up to the top and get phenomenal views, but it's a beautiful place. And we also have some of the hardest trails around on Camelback Mountain, which are double black diamonds for us, which are really for those that are more experienced hikers. And so we have something for everyone throughout the entire city. I think that's important to mention and to let people know to please look at what the trails are rated and make sure you're picking the right trail for you.
You can get lost, you can get hurt, you can, if you don't take your water. Years ago, my dad had a condo down at by Piestewa Peak, and I encountered a couple. It was probably about 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was stopped by there to grab his mail or something. And they just seemed a little lost. I mean, there are houses there, but they were staying at the resort there, and they were out. They didn't have water. They were from Boston or some such, and they got a little bit of a lecture from me about, hey, you need to be. They were clearly confused and getting a little antsy about. They didn't know which way to go. You always got to be careful when you're out in our parks. So we have incidences every year. How many incidences do we have?
Yes, we do. We have, I think last summer there were at least 18 mountain rescues in some of these preserves that we're talking about. So we have a whole Take a Hike, Do It Right campaign, and we have signage at all the trails.
We just had one, right? They had to send in a helicopter, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and so even though they're more prevalent in the summer, they happen year-round. And as the fire department reminds me, even if it's an injury in the middle of the summer and high temperatures, it becomes a heat-related response because now they're injured on the mountain when it's 110 degrees, and they need to get to these individuals quickly, and it takes quite a toll on our first responders as well as the park rangers who help with the mountain rescues. And so our Parks Board approved a policy, and during the summer months we closed trails on the hardest to reach people mountains, which is Piestewa Peak and Camelback Mountain, between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. And we just asked people on days when the Weather Service issues national heat warnings for the local area, that we listen to those rules and don't come out to those two particular mountains between 11 to 5 to hike.
And Camelback parking over there has always been a little bit of an issue. We've tried to do what we can. How's it going?
It's actually better, Councilman. So we reopened Toya Trail.
Couldn't get no worse, as the Beatles so famously sang. So.
That's probably true. But since reopening Toya Trail last fall, parking has not been one of the complaints that we're getting. Either people are used to it or some of the minor changes we were able to make have really helped. So we were able to free up some parking along Invergordon that used to be restricted as no parking to provide a handful of extra spots. We also designated a couple spaces for rideshare pickup and drop-off locations, and so that seems to be working well for us. And the new trailhead now has restrooms and a drinking fountain and bike racks, and so amenities that the other one didn't have.
Badly needed amenities.
Yes.
So pleased to see it. Some of the best money we spent because people want to use it, and that's a good problem to have, but it was too many people and too few parking spaces, and the neighbors were mad. It was a big mess. So it does seem to be better. I actually have occasion to drive down there fairly frequently, usually on weekends. So, and it just seems like before you just have cars circling. It just wasn't a great setup. So I'm glad to hear that it's not just my perception, that it does seem like it's going better.
It's going better, and I don't want to give false illusion here. Those challenges still exist. It's so popular. We do a lot of work with the nearby resorts to help promote our hiking safety campaign and to let them know about parking and encourage rideshare and encourage them to use the vans that a lot of the resorts have to bring people and pick them up as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad, again, to reiterate, the safety, because it just, people from out of state, they just don't realize how fast it can come on you and how hot it really is, because it's dry, they're used to humidity or something where they're from, and then all of a sudden you're like, holy cow, it's 115, it might be too late.
Yes.
So.
Our park rangers often see people like those that you just referenced in your example from out of town and try to educate them on, you don't have enough water with you, those aren't the right shoes, those kinds of things to also help them. And we also have a policy to not allow pets on our trails once it reaches 100 degrees in hopes that people will be wise about picking when to bring their pets on the trail.
Yeah, now all good policies. Now, you talked about the park rangers. We had downturn in the number of park rangers during the economic downturn, trying to build that back up. You want to talk about what their role is?
Absolutely. Park rangers are really some of our greatest ambassadors in our park. Their primary role is to lead with education and to help interact with the public and educate them on park rules, answer questions. We have kind of two types of park rangers, those that you will see out in the mountain parks and preserves, and then those that we call our urban team, which are in our more traditional flatland neighborhood community parks. But irregardless of their assignments, they're there to educate people and answer questions as best as they can. They also provide enforcement, however, and so if people are not following our rules, they try to issue warnings, but they can issue citations and trespass notices at times if that's necessary.
And we've just expanded our use of security at night in the parks. Just had a briefing on the Public Safety Committee about that, in which I sit, but assuming that our audience here maybe didn't avail themselves of the opportunity to watch the Public Safety Committee hearing, how's that going?
It's going very well. So we implemented the pilot security service program thanks to your support and members of the City Council, and those services went into effect February 8th, so we're a few months into that, and we're seeing great results so far. It's nice to get data from people who are in our parks after hours, because currently our park rangers end their patrols by 11 p.m. And so these security guards submit daily reports to us and are able to tell us what they're seeing in the parks. They're finding people in the parks after hours and educating them about park rules. They may be people there playing basketball, but they'll educate them. And they may be people in the park doing bad things, and we're seeing a lot of drug use in the parks.
The 3 ODs, right?
Yes.
ODs who arguably, if we hadn't instituted this program, could have passed away. We had 2 fatalities just the other night. So I was all for this program. It passed 5-4, so it was a close call, but it seemed obvious to me. We just had so many complaints from mothers that didn't feel like they could take their kids to the parks and so forth. It's no fault of yours. We don't have enough people to cover all the acreage and the number of parks that you talked about, but we are trying to increase security. And also just the stuff that'll drive you nuts, the vandalism and the trash, that's all down too, according to your report. So we're grateful for that. I mean, that program, I would argue, has been 100% successful. And there are areas of the city that, may have needed it, arguably some more than others. But regardless, we can't have people living in the parks at night. We can't have people using drugs in the parks at night. It's just not acceptable. It's actually outrageous. And at least for my purposes, I wanted to stop completely. But we're off to a good start with this program, and I expect we're going to see more of that, unless you tell me different.
No, we're supportive, and we think, in time we're going to see more data that's important for us to have. We're also hiring third shift park rangers right now, and so that recruitment closed. We'll be bringing them all on board over the summer as well. But those security services in those 12 parks will still continue, and we'll continue to evaluate that data. But our team is reporting good results, as you mentioned.
Yeah, having official people out there in uniforms walking around, just that in and of itself can really change some of the behaviors that we were seeing, because it just, you alluded to it, this is a big budget, this is a big geographical footprint. We have a lot of parks and millions of people who want to use them. They don't have to just live in Phoenix. People come from all over the country literally to use our parks when you include Reach 11, and not having them be accessible because of misuse by others. That's not fair, that's not right, that's not justice. There are other issues societally that obviously we have to address, but it's not appropriate that one group, frankly, gets to sort of dominate it and make it so that the whole rest of the people don't get to use it. So we're working on that. We appreciate your efforts. You've been a real joy to work with, frankly, and I don't use that word lightly. I think we've had some great successes together. The feedback I've gotten from people who live in the district and really around the city, but mostly I get it from my district. I really, really appreciate your efforts. I know there's more to come, building parks even as we speak. So I just want to thank you for your efforts, and I'm really glad you could come on the show.
Thank you, Councilman. We couldn't do half the things we're doing out here right now without your support, and you've been such a big advocate of our park, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If you have any questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445 or visit my website at Phoenix.gov/District 2. We look forward to seeing you next time on The Issues.